Hola, hola, hello everyone. Welcome to my channel. We have a very interesting guest today. Well, this is Christian Landaeta, and we have Mr. Paul Ellis, all the way from the US. Welcome, Mr. Ellis. Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Christian.
how is it going?
Oh, it's going well. I actually just wrapped up 3 new projects. So I have a new solo album coming out, a collaboration with a guy named Jared White, and but a collaboration with another electronic musician you may have heard of named Paul Nagel from the UK.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm kind of in between projects right now.
Yeah, I discovered Paul Nagel back in the 80s on a slow motion fanzine sampler or something. Yeah, a very nice, yeah, very nice music. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me show you something. If I find it, just give me a second. Yeah, here it is. The first time I ever heard about you was on a Facebook group that I have that we have. It's like a mirror. It's like a memory of the radio station I used to work for. That was Futuro FM back in the late 80s and the first half of the 90s. And
Oh, yeah.
there I would play whatever I wanted. It belonged to a bigger station, Radio Concierto, the most important, one of the most important radio stations in Santiago, Chile, back in the 70s and 80s. So on Futuro FM, I, of course, played lots of electronic music and lots of progressive rock. And well, I left the station back in 96, and then I created a Facebook group, a Facebook community, where some people, we have a nice group of people that post videos from YouTube. And during Easter, that is a very particular time for us in Chile, Easter, what we call in Spanish the Holy Week. There's a tradition of radio stations, a couple of radio stations playing special music, not pop music. And then we have the same type of programming on this Facebook community. So I first heard your, what's it, from out. That's one of the special names.
Oh, from out of the vast comes nearness.
Yeah, it comes nearness. Yeah. So let me share this to you. This is the page of the Facebook group, and I have to mention especially Mr. Isaac Sibilo, who's one of the members of the Facebook group. He began on April the 4th with this album, and I was really surprised. I didn't know about your music or you, so it was a nice occasion.
You know what's interesting is that prior to my working on solo work, I was in another Berlin school band called Dweller at the Threshold.
Yeah.
And somebody, I'm guessing it's not you, but somebody from Radio Futuro interviewed us. And I think it was a telephone interview, but it might have been also in print. But I don't remember the name of the gentleman, but somebody from Radio Futuro interviewed us in, I would guess, somewhere mid to late 90s.
Oh, could have been me. I don't know.
Was it you? Yeah, if you remember Dwell at the Threshold, that was my old band.
I do remember the name very well, but I don't have any special recollection of an interview. So maybe I have to go into, I will have to go to do some regression maybe, but I think it was an interesting band. So one of my questions, in fact, was about what happened with that band, but I'm going to go to that later. Paul, I wanted to start asking you, you said, my music is a Trojan horse that smuggles in my internal sounds and visions into your world. Could you expand on this concept? You have quite an impressive amount of albums so far, like 20 or 19 albums already?
Oh, actually more like somewhere between 30 and 40.
Oh.
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, I just meant to say in a very poetic way that, you know, this music I produce reflects my inner, whatever you want to call it, inner state or inner process, my emotions, my thoughts. Yeah, I put it in a poetic way. I mean, there's no viruses involved. That's your one.
Yeah, I got scared at first but it's an interesting way to put it, because it's like when you first start listening to an album, it becomes something maybe you weren't expecting at the beginning, and that's what makes music interesting, I believe. So I understand the quote. Yeah.
I put a lot of like effort into creating my own fingerprint, my own sound, my own unique sound. I put quite a bit of effort into that.
Mhm. Can you recognize
So
some influences though? I'm sure you can. Some influences.
Influences?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, the obvious ones are, of course, the 70s Berlin school, Klaus Schulze, Tangerine Dream, Ashra with Michael, Mabel Gotching, Michael Honig. Those are the obvious ones, but actually also very much the French Impressionist classical composers, Claude Debussy, Maurice Ravel, Francis Poulenc, and also the American minimalists, Steve Reich, Philip Glass, John Adams, but also a gentleman named Terry Riley. When I first encountered the German school, I really liked it. It was like sidelong pieces that would take you on a journey. They would have these fantastic titles, and it would be basically, keyboards processed through reverbs and echoes, and it would create this sound. And I thought they invented it, but somewhere down the line, I heard Rainbow and Curved Air, and I realized, oh wait, no, there was a precedent for this before that. And also, Stockhausen, you can add a bunch of people here, but certainly those would be my most obvious influences related to the space music I put out. Although my influences are much, much broader than that.
I was going to mention, yes. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh, just, I'm going to say like, progressive rock. And I tend to like music that's very, I can't think of a better word than visionary, but, music that maybe takes you on a journey, or music that isn't mundane. That sounds condescending too, though. I don't mean that, because there's an awful lot of, regular rock or pop music that I happen to like. I don't know, Simon and Garfunkel or things like that, but one thing I really appreciate about the German schools and the ambient and space music schools is that they sort of allow you a level of freedom in your imagination. If you're hearing a rock song, there are lyrics, and they tend to solidify images in your brain. There's a narrative, they're kind of telling you what's going on. They're kind of telling you the way things are. But with this music, just however, I sometimes I hear it as like almost internal, like geometries, patterns and shapes, rather than, a storyline, a narrative.
Yeah,
so I feel like there's that's a very important thing for me, is this freedom.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, Paul, is that you will have as many different stories as people listening to the album. I mean, everyone creates their own picture. Yeah, yeah, and that's really interesting. And even you start modifying your own picture in time, because I would lay down on the floor at home and listen to Stravinsky's Petrushka that I really grew up and then the impressions that it gives me, the music, it starts changing in time according to your own life experiences. I think you agree with that. Yeah.
Yes.
So when did your studio die, and why? I read about that.
It's kind of a long story. Some aspects I'd rather not get into, but primarily it was I had built a very expensive recording PC that I loaded with a lot of very expensive software. So when that died, I wasn't totally naive. I realized, well, I'm not going to get all my programs back, because at this point, when it was built, it was a Windows 7. Then when it died, it was Windows 10 by that point. Well, I'd heard that Windows 10 had a sort of a reverse engineering program where you could play, or you could, load some Windows 7. That wasn't my experience. Out of the hundreds of programs I bought, I was only able to load one of them, which was I believe the Miloslav Philharmonic program. But I had put in so much money into this. Just for an example, there was a program called Ivory, which was a piano program. That alone was like $500. And I had hundreds of programs in it. I lost a lot of money. And it was a major reality check, in the sense that, I realized I wasn't going to be able to get all of them back in there, but I didn't think it was going to be that bad. I didn't think I was going to be just left with one. So I had to start all over again. And I've been building up my, studio again. But immediately after that happened, I had my classical guitar, and I've always played classical guitar. I love that. So I just sort of refocused my energy until I could build up my studio. And I was recording an album you may have heard called A Guitar Has Moonlight in It.
Yeah.
And okay. And you know, in the meanwhile, I was trying to build up a new studio. And I've got one now, it's fine. But I was pretty upset by the loss, or I should say the degree of the loss. I didn't realize it was going to be quite that bad. But anyway, you know, the Phoenix rose again. I've got this style of music. It's in my blood. It's in my DNA. It's very much a part of me. I'll always come back to it. It was just a, you know, it was a stop along the way. We'll say it that way.
But you were lucky that you didn't lose the album that you were making. I mean, it was
I was able to recover it later. I thought I had, but I was able to recover it later, and it's on my. This might be a little confusing, but I'm actually on a couple different Bandcamp pages. One is Cyclical Dreams out of Argentina. One is The Groove Unlimited. They have a Bandcamp page, and then I have my own personal Bandcamp page. And you can find an album on there called Now Then, and that is the tracks I was able to recover at a later point. I had forgotten that I had rendered some of these waves and stashed them on a different hard drive, and then a couple years later I discovered it, and I was very happy that I was able to finish it up.
Good. Now you've defined your style as space music, and I have the impression that you try to put it away, aside from electronic music as such, and I would like to understand that.
I think the phrase electronic music it's too broad. I mean, you know, you have dance genre, mostly, I mean, thousands and thousands of dance genres. And I do like differentiating what I do in the sense that my music is a little more internal. It's not quite so, hey, let's go to the club. You're not going to put my music on at a party. It's maybe, you know, to be at home in you know, relaxing spaces, maybe a meditative mood, you know, so that's why I usually choose that phrase. I also like the phrase because it could be outer space or it could be inner space. I mean, both of those things fit really well for this kind of music. And electronic music is just far too broad. Also, sometimes I'll throw out Berlin School because I'm clearly influenced by it, but I also don't want certain presumptions about that school that sometimes are tied with it. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
Yeah.
Space music is a little broader term.
And do you feel connected to outer space in any way? Do you think that there are you know, other beings living, looking at us, above us? Sometimes
I believe the chances that there's no other life out there is pretty slim. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
But I am a very skeptical nature. I don't subscribe to many philosophies about UFOs, or sometimes people define it too closely, and I'm left wondering, well, how would you possibly know this information? You can't know this information. I'm skeptical in the sense of the stories that come to us. Okay. People have a tendency to confabulate, to exaggerate stories, to some cases just completely fabricate them on their own to get attention. So I'm skeptical, but that doesn't mean I am completely closed off to the possibility.
Yeah, you possibly are familiar with Chariots of the Gods.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and the Eric von Daniken. And yes, by the way, it has an interesting music score by Peter Thomas Orchestra, something like it. Very, very varied types of music. Like now, how do you account? This is a simple question, maybe. How do you account for the massive appeal of electronic music, or whatever you want to call it, and music in general, to such extent that it can unite divided cultures and minds? It is really one of the universal languages, and it's been like that for ages, and it will continue like that.
Yes. I think it's probably the most universal language. And I don't remember where this quote is from, but somebody, actually I do know, it was Tom Petty, the rock musician, said that music is the closest thing that we really know like magic. To me, it is like magic. It can bring out a wellspring of emotions. It can also put you in a very calm, intellectual and meditative space, but it really always, I mean, the good stuff, the stuff that speaks to you, the really good stuff goes right to the heart. And the really good stuff will bypass your brain and go right to the heart, and you really feel it. Not that the brain is a bad instrument to include. Sometimes, like as a creator, though, I will say that sometimes the brain does get in the way. If you're too analytical in the creative process, you're probably going to choke the creativity. Another quote that I like is, do the first draft with your heart and then the second draft with your head. In other words, don't engage in editing and analyzing and all this stuff until after you've created it. Because if you start there, you're probably going to overthink it. You're going to, like, you run into paint yourself in a corner. And at least that's been my experience. So I tend to, improvise a beginning part, and then I will go back, listen to it, sort of analyze it and go, okay, so here's the flow of the piece. It starts here, it goes up, and it goes down. And then I find a way of maybe accentuating, or, maybe a few brush strokes to accentuate a move, whether it's, increasing or decreasing. So that's, in a nutshell, that would be my process.
Okay, now it's a coincidence that you're describing what I had in another question that goes like this. How do you come to define the tone, extension, and color, if we can speak of colors, of a music piece, when you only have a vague notion of what you really want to express at the beginning? I know that I'm a musician, so it comes from a music fan. This is a question from a music fan. I can't imagine.
I would say probably the easiest way to explain that is, I'll search around, maybe like create a patch on my synthesizer with a certain sound, and then I'll just start playing. And then once something catches my attention, like, here's a good seed idea, here we go, then I'll expand on that. But I usually start with improvisation. I usually start with like, again, trying not to think about it too much, but just playing and seeing, how's this sound shaping? What is the best melody or bass line or whatever it is for this particular sound?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, how easy or difficult is it to keep a career as an independent musician and composer today?
That's an excellent question. I would say the 21st century has not been very good to musicians. It's very difficult for established artists to maintain a career. As far as someone in my small corner of the music world, it takes, all the drive comes from me. I'm not getting really any money from this. I'm doing it because I love it. It is part of my heart. It's my art. I do it because I love it. And I don't get much money for it, but I get people writing me and telling me things like how much it means to them, and that is wonderful. That's a very good reward, if you will. But as far as making money, I don't know of anybody in space music that can just strictly do this. Tangerine Dream does, but they're an established band name since the 70s. They have an established following. For those of us who are like newer, it's a little more difficult.
Right. Now, what collaborations you've done do you feel more happy about, more comfortable with, like Steve Roach? I read you've done things with Ron Boots. How did those collaborations come about? And which ones? Yeah.
The one with Steve Roach is, he was coming up to do a concert in Portland, and I was going to open for him. So he came up about a couple days early, and we were in my studio, and we just started playing, and we both liked what was going on. So we just started recording it. Then we did the show, and he went back home, and I added some parts to the piece. It's called Sands of Time. And, I enjoyed working with Steve. He's, very knowledgeable and he has that expertise in this level of music. We didn't have to communicate too much. Another favorite collaboration was with Craig Padilla. We did an album called Ecosystem, which I'm very pleased with that result. I just recently did 2 collaborations that I'm pleased with, but they're on the opposite ends of the spectrum for music. The one that I did with Paul Nagel, that I was just mentioning, it's very abstract. It would be closer in spirit to, I don't know if you know the Oedipus Tyrannus album that Tangerine Dream did.
Which one? Sorry.
It's called Oedipus Tyrannus. It was actually originally abandoned, and then in that recent box set of the 70s from Virgin, they finally released it, and it's very abstract. kind of more early, like maybe like Zeit.
Yeah, yeah. There's the ecosystem.
Okay, there's Ecosystem.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, so the Paul Nagel one is very abstract, maybe more Eno,
Okay.
floating kind of pads. Not, and on the other end of the spectrum is this album I'm doing with a guy named Jared White. That it would be more like 80s, like Schmeling era Tangerine Dream, maybe a little bit of Ulrich Schnaus, where it was more beat driven. Most of what I've done is more on the art end of the spectrum, like, you know, Bauman era TD, Klaus Schulze's 70s work, you know, the Ashra and Michael Hennig, you know, the more artistic, I don't know if that's the right word, but I'll use it. The more artistic side, as opposed to the more commercial side. Not like I disliked it, but I just, you know, I have my preferences. But recently I thought, you know what, I've done so many albums with the more free flowing, without beats, you know, there's no beats, there's no guitar. So that, well, maybe I should switch gears. And Jared is very much influenced more by the Schmeling era. So we decided to do an album together, and I'm very pleased with it. It's not out yet, but they're on two ends of the spectrum, and I enjoy both of those. Your original question was more like, how do I like it, or who do I like it best?
No, which of those collaborations made you happier in the end? Like you felt that you got something different, and maybe it inspired something new for the future. I don't know.
I was probably the one with Steve Roach. I wish we kind of did a whole album, but it just never really happened. And again, the one with Craig Padilla, I was very pleased with. But again, actually, both of those were pretty close to what I was already doing. I've done other albums, like I was saying, I did the classical guitar album called A Guitar Has Moonlight in It. I've done a couple, and this surprises some people, but I really like retro pop, like, you know, the kind of pop and rock that happened in the 60s and 70s. So I have a side project called Nectarine. So I mean, you know, I've done some collaborations with a Finnish progressive rock artist named Otso Pakarinen, and he goes by Ozone Player. So I did some progressive rock too. So I mean, I do lots of different, I mean, I've done ragtime guitar. I've done lots of different styles, but, you know, the bulk of my work is in the more artistic, you know, some people really don't like the word psychedelic, but if you take apart the word from the Latin roots, all it really means is to color the mind. So I like to think of my music as psychedelic, but not necessarily, I mean that like in a drug related way, but just in the sense that it colors your mind. You know, it paints a picture like classical music does.
Yeah, now you just mentioned that your music would never be possibly danced to in a disco or something, but my question is, would you go into pop electronic music if you were offered the chance? I mean, or by no means. Like if somebody asks you, a producer or something, oh, why don't you make an album like, you know, more dance oriented or something? Would you never touch that?
I'd go there. I would do that. In fact, well, I don't know about dance oriented, but like I was saying, the project with Jared Wright is far more rhythmic. But no, I'm not opposed to it. You know, there's a few musics that I don't like enough that I wouldn't bother. I mean, I'm not crazy about, I don't know, country music or death metal or
I was going to ask that.
I mean, there's some that I just don't have any interest in, but there's also a wide variety of music that I wouldn't mind trying.
But you like, for example, Depeche Mode, that type of bands?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. Actually, I've mentioned in places that the point where my interest in this music really took off, there was a week period when I got Tangerine Dream Stratosphere, Klaus Schulze Mirage, Snowflakes Are Dancing by Tamita, and Oxygen by Jean-Michel Jarre. That really focused my mind like a laser beam. But actually, 3 years before that, and I was very young at the time, but I saved up my newspaper route money and I bought Kraftwerk Autobahn. So I was, you know, and even though Autobahn was more in the artistic side, after that, they really went more into a dance genre or dance style, which I think they're the greatest at, really. I mean, they're like the Beatles of dance music.
Yeah.
Um,
The Man Machine
but
was
Depeche Mode,
fantastic.
definitely,
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
definitely.
Okay. Now, you come from a different background than just electronic music. What motivated your career in music? Yes, because originally you were involved in rock bands. You mentioned Dweller on Threshold. So, are there any musicians in your family? What influences do you have?
Oh no,
No.
no. My dad was a science professor and a coach,
Okay. Yeah.
and nobody in my family. I mean, my older brother and sister would listen to music, and they actually turned me on to some very good music early on in my life. You know, bands like Moody Blues and Yes and Crutchles and Nash and all this late 60s and 70s stuff. But as far as anybody in my family being a musician, I was like, no, not at all. I completely self-taught.
Did you have access on the radio to shows? Because in Chile, we had to have somebody traveling to Europe or the US because the industry, the record industry, was so limited that we never saw things like the progressive classical rock albums were released very, very, very late, if at all. So did you have access to all this music? Because there's so much music that was being made.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh yeah. Like I said, they got me interested in it at a very young age, and I think I was in 5th or 6th grade when I bought Kraftwerk Audubon. So I was also like self-determined. Like I went out and hunted for the stuff that I liked. But I grew up in Seattle, Washington, which is in the 70s. I got to say, they had fantastic radio for me to listen to and find out. Before I bought, I was able to listen and go, okay, that one I want. The other stuff, But yeah, I had great resources in Seattle as far as radio went. Very lucky that way.
Were you ever in Oregon, Portland, Oregon? No,
I do now.
yeah.
I've lived mostly in the Northwest, Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, and there's also Vancouver, Washington. Which, when I say I'm from Vancouver, I'm not from Canada. This is actually the original Vancouver. Vancouver, Washington is one of the oldest outposts on the West Coast. It's a medium-sized town, maybe like about the size of San Jose in California. I also lived in like Indiana and Virginia. We moved a bit, but mostly the Northwest. So this is my home.
Yeah, I was asking. Yeah,
and
I was asking you about Portland, Oregon, because there's a guy, Archie Patterson. You possibly know him.
I was on his label.
Yeah, look at that. Now I discovered lots of music back in the mid 80s. I usually swapped records with him or bought records from him, and he had this fantastic rock fanzine, and that's how I discovered Gustave Doré, the illustrator, by the way. So yeah, so you were on his label.
Yes, it started before I was on his label. He distributed. It was actually only ever released on cassette, but it was called Secret Fire. That's also on my Bandcamp site. But he sold that through his website, and then shortly after that, we made the band Dweller, and he said, "Yeah, I'll put it out." So we put out, I believe, 2 albums on Urock, along with people that were on that label at the time were like bands like Eric Wollo. Do you know Eric Wollo?
Yeah, sure, fantastic. Yeah,
Green Isaac. Some really great music was on there, but we all kind of wound up leaving at the same time, and I will leave that unanswered why, but there were difficulties. But from Urock, we went to another Portland label that was much more ambient oriented, but it's called Hypnos. Not sure if you're familiar with Hypnos.
No.
Okay. I had a solo album on there, and the last Dweller at the Threshold album was on there.
Okay. And what happened? What happened with Dweller at the Threshold? By the way, what happened with the band?
Well, we did like 3 albums.
Yes.
I think we just sort of reached a point where our musical directions were just a little too different, and there were some difficulties. I still talk to the guys, but there were some difficulties, and maybe here's one way I could put it. I didn't feel like I was realizing my music as far as I could go. I felt like I was playing at a certain level to accommodate, and I really wanted to focus like a laser beam on where I could take it. So, you know, I just said, it was actually my band. I even came up with the name. The band actually grew out of an earlier band called Tribal Machine.
Okay.
So that was me and a guy named Jeff Facey, and then Dave Fulton joined. And at that point, we became Dwell at the Threshold. But, you know, I mean, I feel positive about the music we put out. I feel good about it. But I just felt like it was time for me to focus more like a laser beam. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but I needed to focus on my music in a different way.
I don't know if you realize, but you mentioned the laser beam a few times now, and I was going to ask you if you possibly are familiar with Tim Blake's and his laser beams and the laser beam track and all the laser things. And he's a fantastic musician, legendary man.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah,
my two favorites are Crystal Machine and New Jerusalem. Those are my two favorites.
Yeah.
And in fact, we saw him in Portland. The show was kind of a disaster because I think his computer broke, or maybe it was some of his synthesizers, or something happened on the plane trip over. And so we had to scramble. A friend of mine named Jay Switchtenberg had a spare Apple, a learning Mac that he was able to, and I think also a Roland U220, which is a sound module, so that he was able to put on the show with just those two things. But
when was that?
When was that?
When was that?
Oh, I would say sometime in the 90s.
Okay. Okay.
In fact, we bumped into Archie Patterson there. The show was fine, but you could tell up on stage he was not happy. He was like kind of angry, and maybe it wasn't the best show in the world, but there were reasons for it. So the music was fine.
Yeah. Yeah. New Jerusalem was a big hit, so to speak, on Futuro FM. So yeah, fantastic track.
Yes.
Now, I was going to ask you about something more technical for the the musicians watching us. What is sound morphing? I read about your sound morphing. Morphing. That's it.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the techniques that I like to do is, let me back up. One of the critiques I have of many Berlin School albums I have is that somebody will start a 4-note sequence and it starts chugging along, and then it doesn't change for like 15 minutes. Okay. There's no change, no evolution. I personally like, you know, more movement, more activity. I like to balance between, because when you do have like, it doesn't change very quickly, you can set up this sort of, you know, really almost trance-like or meditative-like effect. But I like to have enough movement and change that you can also listen to it and not just, you know, not get bored. So to me, sound morphing is like, I will take like maybe 5 bass sounds that are different enough that they're unique. And I'll start with one. And as the sequence goes along, I'll fade in the other one and fade out the first one, you know, then fade in the third one, fade out the second one, and that kind of thing, where the sound is actually evolving over time. Each sound in my music, if you're paying attention, you know, more often than not, there's actually quite a few sounds making one sound. So sometimes people just think it's just one sound, but there may be up to 20 sounds comprising one sound, and I'll morph between them to change the shape of it, to you know, change the texture, or however you want to say it. Also, like, for example, there's an album I did called The Sacred Ordinary, and I did a piece on there called Icon. And if you listen to it, I've told people this, and people typically don't believe me, but I'm telling you, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of parts in there. Sometimes a sound only appears once in a 10-minute part. There are things that like go through it, but if you're listening, it's constantly changing. And it's kind of more of a fast driving one for me. But if you pay attention, you'll notice that there are lots and lots and lots of different sounds happening.
All right. Now, I'd like to ask you to please pick a few names from the ones I'm going to mention now, and maybe give us an insight. People like Leon Theremin, Robert Moog, Wendy Carlos, or Stravinsky. You mentioned Ravel, Debussy already. Scott Joplin, you already mentioned because you were into that. Yeah, Miles Davis. I mean, maybe you can choose one or two. Sorry.
Okay. I'll start with Miles Davis because I'm actually kind of a latecomer to him. Of course, I always loved Kind of Blue. I think that should be kind of in everybody's music catalog.
Yeah.
But I didn't really look much closer than that until recently, and I started going through his catalog. Amazing musician. The reason I'm bringing him up is that I read a quote, and I'll be honest, I can't remember if it was Klaus Schulze or Edgar Fresy from Tangerine Dream, but they said, the one common name that all of the Berlin School musicians shared was Miles Davis. They all loved Miles Davis. That kind of surprised me. But then again, like when I talk about ragtime or the kind of 60s and 70s pop music I do, or progressive rock, I get influenced by them and they creep into my music. Although, how do I say this? All kinds of music influence what I do, even though it's very specifically in this genre of space music. I'm drawing from everywhere. I use a lot of syncopations, like counter sequences that are syncopated against each other. That I got from when I was younger, I would play ragtime.
Right.
So that I got the syncopation from that. Debussy and Ravel to me are like gods. I mean, they made music fluid. And the other observation I have about them that I think influences space music is that they made tonal qualities or the texture of a sound equally important to melody, harmony, and rhythm, which is the foundation of music since day one. But I think the Impressionists came along and made textures as important. And I think that seeps into space music.
Right.
Some of the other names. Robert Moog, of course. How can you say enough good about him, or Tom Oberheim, or any of those gentlemen? Yes. When I first started doing music, I didn't come from exactly a very rich family. I wouldn't call us poor, but we didn't have much money. Mm-hmm. And I certainly didn't have enough money to get a synthesizer. When I first became interested in them in the late 70s, they were prohibitively expensive. They were very expensive. So I didn't start collecting them until I believe it was the mid 80s. But I always had this dream in my head. I always wanted, because I heard something in it. To me, it sounded like the sound of the future. And I just heard potential in there. And maybe a way of saying it is like a piano always sounds like a piano. Even if you do prepared piano, it changes it a little bit, but it's always going to kind of sound like a piano. Trumpet's always going to sound like a trumpet unless you process it. But with a synthesizer, while you're playing a line, you can reach up, change the filter, change the envelopes. You can change the textures while you're playing it in a way that no other instrument can. So that was, part of the reason why I was so fascinated with electronic music. But yeah, Wendy Carlos too is like huge fan, such a pioneer. Also an early one, I think sometimes doesn't get enough credit, is Tomita.
Yeah.
Some people don't care for his work as much because there's these sort of cartoony sounds in there, like a little chicken.
Exactly. Yes.
So they don't take it seriously. But if you listen to his craft, he was way up there. He was, I still to this day, there's sections of Snowflakes Are Dancing that I don't think have been reached. I don't know if that, if you know what I'm saying, but I mean, what he did with the tools he had are amazing. And the same for Wendy Carlos, of course.
I think the criticism that he might have gotten in the past is that it happened to me when I first heard pictures at an exhibition. I first got to hear the piano version, then the orchestral version, and then the third thing that I got to listen to was the Tomita's version. And I did feel that these chickens running around sounds, I didn't feel comfortable about that because but then I realized, as you say, that he was really amazing in the ability to transfer the original script, the score, into these electronic buildings, so to speak.
Oh.
Yeah.
A word I like to use, a word that I like to use is animating. I think that electronic music is superior on the level of animating a sound. And I think Tomita specifically was an absolute genius at it. Once again, what he did with what he had stands up today. I listen to, I would say, Snowflakes Are Dancing and The Planets the most. Those are the ones that really move me. But I mean, I have all those albums. They're all great.
Now, for the technologically minded people and musicians watching us, what's the main gear in your studio? I mean, if you could mention just a few things.
Okay. Okay. So actually, you want to pause here?
No. You want to pause? Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah.
Here's why I can actually take this laptop into the room and show you.
Sure. End of part one.
Okay.
We'll be back soon